and welcome back to yet another episode of the Big 12 Huddle. I'm your first co-host, and introducing my other co-host here, I'm Calvin, Cal at the CGA Tour Podcast, the College Huddle's official affiliate of
Official.
Oklahoma State Athletics, hence having Casey Dunn on my left shoulder and Brian Nard on my right shoulder, Angels and Demons on either shoulder. You make the judge here. You be the judge. With that being said, is my catchphrase, and I'm going to move it over to Roger here, Night Bengal, the UCF affiliate here for the College Huddle Podcast Network. Roger, how's it going?
It's going great, man. Running on 2.5 hours of sleep, but still bringing you content.
Oh, yeah. Got to pump it out here. We are also officially on all the streaming platforms. So if you're watching us on YouTube and you're going, man, would love to just really hear these guys, don't need to see their faces, or you're just not able to due to work regulations or other things you got going on, you're driving along, you can't watch YouTube at the same time, we are now on all streaming platforms, Spotify, iTunes, etc., Pocket Cast, Breaker FM, all of those good ones here, as well as SoundCloud. So, Roger, I want to talk to you a little bit about the college football playoff rankings tonight. It came out earlier this week. We're recording this on Thursday, November 7th. And on Tuesday night, there was nothing big that happened in the entire world except for the college football playoff rankings. So I thought I'd ask you, what were your first thoughts here when you saw the rankings drop, and especially how similar they were to the AP poll?
Yeah, a couple things kind of strike me, right? One is, to me, we're seeing that Big 12, Big 10 bias that we were expecting to see. Number one. Number two, it's interesting to me that certain teams within even the same conference can be undefeated or not undefeated and still be ranked above the undefeated within the same conference. So, as it pertains to the Big 12, well, first of all, how is Notre Dame number 10, considering who they lost to at the early part of the season? Really?
It's a great question.
If you don't think this is about brands, there's no further that you have to look than Notre Dame at number 10. I'm just going to say that. And a 6-2 Alabama.
Brother, don't get me started on Alabama. I have a huge issue with SMU not being higher up. And the main reason why is because I think it's a brand deal at the end of the day. I mean, do I think Alabama is a better team than SMU? Honestly, on a neutral field, no, I do not. In Tuscaloosa, yeah, I believe Alabama would beat SMU there. I do think they'd be a little bit out of their element, having to go to that kind of SEC challenge and all the prestige, etc. But I also have an issue with, of course, BYU, our Big 12 brethren, being ranked at 9 and below Indiana, when I don't think Indiana has played anyone. And I know this is the famous talking point by everyone now, but I got off the Big 12 here. I also am confused. Alabama's got 2 losses, but you're going to have Iowa State, a 7-1 team, that much farther behind them. Yeah, they're going to be 7. They're 17, and they only have 1 loss. Now, I'm not saying the losses compare, but Iowa State's played a pretty decent schedule so far.
I think that's the better argument, but then at the same time, I'll say this. Indiana did play 9 games and won 9 games. So, it's kind of hard to argue that. I could see where they're coming up with that for Indiana. However, they're ranked above Penn State at 7, or below Penn State at 7-1. And again, Indiana, their schedule, if you look at their schedule, it has not been difficult, right? But then again, there's no consistency in any of these rankings. So to me, it's, you got Miami at 9-0. Okay. So you're going to put them above some of the other teams. That makes sense because, again, they've played 9 games and have won 9 games. So I could make an argument either way, I guess, for some of these, but it's just like, it just seems really brand heavy. Let's just put it that way. Ohio State's had problems this year. Georgia's been all over the place. Texas, they have been pretty consistent. They had the 1 loss. Tennessee, same kind of deal. but they're not undefeated. So the question to me, I guess for me to you, and I guess I'll turn this back on you a little bit. Can an argument be made for the top 10? Do you believe that those are the top 10 teams in the right order in the country? Yes or no?
No, and the reason why I do want to back up the BYU tidbit here versus Indiana is also versus Penn State. It's the same reason. In my mind, BYU should be ranked above both. The reason being is that BYU has beaten two other college football playoff ranked teams. They beat the 13th team in the nation, which hey, at the time, Friday night, BYU playing SMU. Did not think we'd be saying those are two teams in the top 15 9 weeks later. But of course, I did not project the Oklahoma State schedule to work out this way either. So I don't know anything there. But I also say Indiana hasn't played anyone either, and BYU and Penn State hasn't played really anyone. And so for BYU to have beaten K State by 29 and then beaten SMU, granted, barely escaped with a win, but we now know SMU is at least a decent team. That's where I'm puzzled here, just because you have the Big Ten, but I do agree with you though on the bias part of it. I think that's what you're getting at. This is a brand deal. I mean, the bigger brand is going to be ranked higher. Okay, Penn State's ranked at 6 right now. And if I really have that big of an issue with Indiana, well, they play Ohio State the last game of the season, the regular season. So it'll all work itself out. It'll all figure out. If BYU wins out, they're in no matter what. They're Big 12 champions. But what I'm trying to really kind of work towards is shouldn't Iowa State have a chance here to be, in the college football playoff discussion as well? They're 17, which to me I think is low enough that some things really have to work in their favor for them to get in the top 12.
Yeah, I mean, as we get later on into the season, right? So the 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 rankings, I mean, we just mentioned it. 9 games are gone for some teams, 8 games are gone for the others, right? And so the number of opportunities that are left to make a case, to me, it's pretty clear that we're trying to set up, not we, but the because again, it's an invitational, right? The playoff is an invitational. It is still an invitational. It is not a true playoff. Is set up so that you get more of the quote unquote P2 schools in versus one of the non P2 schools. So, from that perspective, the Big 12 will still get one in the playoff. Right now, if we were to look at it today, it would be BYU. It would be a number 4 seed. However, being a number 4 seed, right? What does that do for home field advantage, etc.? So that's the other question. What are the pairings for the 4 seeds, the 1 seeds, the 2 seeds, 3 seeds, and 4 seeds, right? So I still think, the Big 12 will get one team in. That's not going to be a question. The question is one team versus multiple teams, and clearly the rankings as well as the way that the playoff was structured, we all knew that they were structuring it so that the at-large would be another SEC Big Ten type teams, and they're hoping to get 3 teams in, right, out of 12 slots. So it's really, really interesting to me, but I think this is the new normal. I think on average, unless you have chaos at the top in one of the conferences, you're going to see one Big 12 team in per year.
And that's where I'm already annoyed, even though I probably could have seen this coming preseason. Always hearing for
Everybody
years,
saw
hey,
it
it's gonna be
coming.
12 teams. Yeah, but always hearing for so many years previously, hey, it's 12 teams. And thinking in my head, okay, 12, we should be mathematically should be able to get in 2. Surely there won't be 10 total SEC, or 9 total SEC and Big 10 teams, and then one group of 5, one ACC, and one Big 12. Theoretically, there will be 9, teams. But now, since the conferences have expanded, where you've got Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State, Indiana, all, in the Big 10, and then you have the SEC of, Georgia, Texas, Tennessee. And in other years, probably Ole Miss as well too. Just they kind of lost a weird one at Kentucky. Otherwise, they'd be up here as well in the top 12. Then that's where I'm like, man, that's tough. Just as a Big 12 fan overall, just to think, wow, year in, year out, even if Iowa State's having a really good season, they just do not have the same brand recognition as Penn State. When if I'm comparing schedules just head to head of Iowa State and Penn State, both have one loss, but one has played. Yeah, I mean, Iowa State has played other teams and they will
Well,
play other
let's
teams
do
that are
this.
ranked inside
To
the top 25.
Well, let's explore that a little bit. Let's bring up. Why don't you bring up Penn State's schedule / record, and let's do the
Got it in
same
front of
thing
me
for
right here.
Iowa State. All right.
Yeah.
So start off with Penn State. Who have they played this year? And
So
what were the
first game of
scores?
season. Yep, first game of season, West Virginia. Penn State won 34-12. Then second game was Bowling Green. Penn State wins 34-27, so a 7-point win there. Kent State was the third game. They're the worst team in Division I football by all metrics. Penn State won 56-0. But then we get the Big Ten schedule. Illinois, Penn State. Penn State won 21-7. Penn State beat UCLA 27-11. Penn State beats USC at USC in overtime by 3, 33-30. Penn State beat Wisconsin 28-13. Then Ohio State, of course, beat Penn State this past weekend 20-13. That was their first ranked matchup of the currently ranked teams in the cultural playoff for Penn State.
All right. Let's put Iowa State on the table.
So Iowa State, yeah, they have not really faced. I don't know. Some are going to say they face just even competition, like myself here, but yeah, Iowa State here. Their first game was against North Dakota, won 21-3. Second game, they beat Iowa 20-19, so by 1 at Iowa, but Iowa's not ranked. Then Iowa State plays Arkansas State, wins 52-7. They then go to Houston, 20-0, beating Houston. Then they play Baylor, 43-21. Iowa State wins there. Iowa State wins again here, 28-16 over West Virginia. And then Iowa State beats UCF by 3, 38-35. And then Iowa State just lost this past weekend here to Texas Tech by 1, 22-23, and that was at home.
So again, I don't think that's a good argument because I don't think Iowa State's a good team. They're not a great team.
I'm just appalled that they are. So, but by being good versus great moves you 11 spots down compared to Penn State when Penn State's had one matchup. And that's been with a ranked team. And I understand they lost that one, and it was a 7-point game at the end of the day, but Penn State didn't score an offensive point. So it's all just a fluky, like maybe too big of an eye test deal. But Iowa State will play at least one ranked opponent here in the top 25, at least stands today in K-State, which K-State's 6-2. I get they're not a one-loss Ohio State team, but I'm not trying to pick apart Ohio State for their one loss whatsoever. I just am trying to kind of go into Penn State's a little bit more because it's a home game for them. Ohio State's was not. And talk a little bit more about the Big 12 here. Just if K-State doesn't lose to Houston, then I'm like, hey, you know what? Where are we at? Like, what's going on? But I'm not going to talk about that too much because they lost to Houston.
I think the better argument, honestly, would be BYU versus Penn State.
Well, but to me, it's just a dumb, like, it's dumb that BYU is ranked lower than Penn State to begin with. Like, that was just like, walked in the room, was just like, that's stupid. But BYU's undefeated. Penn State's got one loss against the only team that's ranked. So why would they be 6 and BYU wouldn't be higher? God only knows.
Oh, brand. That goes into
right.
point.
But that's to go back.
But I'm saying, I guess
point.
I guess what I'm saying to you is the better argument out of those two would be BYU versus Iowa State. Because I don't think I told you, I don't know if you remember on this podcast, I told you, you asked me which one would we be more likely to beat, BYU or Iowa State? And I told you Iowa State. And you kind of looked at me like I was silly. And at the time,
I remember that.
Yeah. And at the time, to me, BYU is a stronger team. It's a more physical team, and it's a better team than what Iowa State is. Iowa State is good on both sides of the ball and is winning games because of that. It's not great on either side of the ball. And therefore, I wouldn't see them as a playoff team right now because of that. BYU, I would. Iowa State, I don't. I think Iowa State is one of those teams that can beat anybody on any given Saturday, but I don't think it's one of those teams that you expect to beat the other team on any given Saturday. If that makes any sense.
Maybe you're missing my whole point here, though. I'm saying there should be another Big 12 team in. I'm not saying BYU versus Iowa State. I think BYU is better every day of the week versus Iowa State at this point. Earlier on this season, I do have some Oklahoma State like 2011, 2021 history in me, which is like going to Iowa State and playing them there is just tough. And we haven't played BYU enough for me to have a consensus opinion on how it is playing at their place in the comparison. But my point is, why the heck is Penn State so much higher up than Iowa State? Because
I
both
don't
only have one
understand why
loss
Penn State
now.
is above Tennessee, to be honest.
And yeah, and why is Penn State above BYU? And why are they, that's what I'm trying to get at here is that Penn State, okay, they're sixth, and I'm hearing rumblings about James Franklin being fired. Penn State, look around. You're sixth in the country. There are, I mean, how does he get stale and old that you got James Franklin for this many years when you're like on the cusp? Who are you going to go get? I mean, that's always my deal with Gundy as the head coach for Oklahoma State. And I'm starting to kind of rethink that a little bit, especially this season. But that's another topic for another day. I'm just going, hey, you're Penn State. Like you've got it. You've got one heck of a brand. You're sixth in the country when you've lost one ranked game and the only one you've played. Like that. Hey, I'm thumping my chest here. I've got a chance to win out the rest of the season if I'm Penn State and go host a playoff game on my own campus. Like that's one heck of a cool thing to be able to do. And maybe this is the little guy, small fish, and big pond of a Big 12 fan, Oklahoma State fan. But I'm I'm not going into this year of new college football playoff rankings going, man, if we're
if we're
six,
going
that's not great
purely
if I'm Penn State.
if we're going purely by who I think, or where Iowa State should rank, right? I'm not necessarily convinced yet, right? When it comes to this, let's just go through these. Is Iowa State better than Oregon? No. Is Iowa State better than Ohio State?
No, but I would not work it that
Hold
way.
on.
I take Iowa State over 16 through, up to Penn State type of deal the other way. Because I'm with you. I mean, the first 5, 6 teams in the country, I'm not picking Iowa State over. No,
Do I think
no
Iowa
chance.
State should be over Alabama? Yes. Do I think Iowa State should be over Notre Dame? Yes. Do I think Iowa State should be over Boise? Probably, but Boise has a strong team this year. Do I think Iowa State should be over SMU? Not until they get to 8 wins like SMU did. Should they be over Texas A&M? Probably, right? LSU, I haven't watched enough LSU football to really say one way or the other. Ole Miss, Ole Miss has got a good team this year. I can't say one way or the other whether they're better than Iowa State. I think there are 3 or 4 teams that they could rank higher, but even if you move them up 3 or 4 spots, you're still looking at being ranked 14th versus ranked 17th. This early in the season, I don't think it really matters. I think you're going to see more of it shake out. What I'm more concerned about is the multi-loss teams that are up there versus the one-loss teams versus the no-loss teams. I think that's the comparison for me.
Well, and all I really want to get at here is, as a Big 12 fan, dang, what I was worried about, what everyone was worried about, is here, and it's true.
And
It's
we knew it was going to
brand.
happen.
And yeah, I'm not surprised by this. I am just disappointed that what I was worried about is true. And I think that makes perfect sense here. I'm just going, man, when you think about something for a while, dang, that sucks. But then when reality hits you in the face, you're like, oh, all right. So there is one Big 12 team. And
Well,
that's all that's all I'm saying.
the bigger question is can Iowa State dig out of that hole for the rest of the season to get to a playoff spot, right? So can it move from 17? Let's say Iowa State wins out. Can Iowa State move from 17 to 12?
Yes. And there is one scenario. they went out and they played BYU, and then there's a good possibility, I think, that the Big 12 has 2 teams in then. It would be tough, but are you going to take an Iowa State team with 1 loss, their home place by 1 in the big, or are you going to take BYU who has 1 loss and it wasn't the Big 12 championship game? Who's who's the odd man out here? And I
Or
know the
are you,
champion has to be the
are you,
is the top
are you
4.
going to take a 2-loss Alabama?
Right,
Or,
yeah.
you know what I mean? That's the bigger question for me. But I think there's time. There isn't as much time. The question is whether Iowa State has an opportunity to climb the ladder, all things being equal with other teams. And it's an ESPN product. It's an ESPN invitational, and ESPN makes its money and becomes solvent. By the way, they get into the black only after the playoff is played. I used to work for Disney, and I was in leadership at Disney. So I got to see what the other business units were doing and what their profit and loss statements looked like. ESPN is in the red until the playoff. That's why they spent so much money on the playoff, because the commercials that they sell and the advertising that they sell in the playoff is what actually pushes them into the black. They're losing money the entire year until that happens. So, what is ESPN going to do? They're going to put the teams that are going to be draw the highest ratings, and if they draw the highest ratings, then they're going to be able to up their ad revenue. That's really what this is, and it's because it's an invitational, it's not a playoff. You're going to see this through every playoff, every invitational till it becomes a playoff.
Yeah,
However,
it just sucks
the
that
Big 12
the
has
worry is true.
the Big
That's all.
12 does have the opportunity year in and year out to win the championship. If the Big 12, TCU made it to the championship game 2 years ago. If the Big 12 can consistently make it to the championship game and or win, then that dynamic will change on the next contract cycle. But you got to earn it. It's just like like hoops, right? We talk about Big 12 hoops. Who won the national championship last year? Wasn't a Big 12 team. UConn. Who won the year before that? Wasn't a Big
UConn.
12 team.
That's why we're trying to go get them to join the conference, right? That's why there's stipulations and stuff
I
out there too for
don't
them.
want UConn.
I know we've talked
Don't
about
want
it ad
UConn.
nauseum, but keep going
Yeah.
here. Just making a large point.
Yeah. So the point is, the Big 12 has still built up a strong enough brand, and we saw it, right? Where the rankings, the strength of schedule, the RPI, all those ratings that we look at when it comes to basketball is predicated on the perceived out of conference, number one, because in basketball, out of conference is more important, right? How the team does out of conference. And then how the teams do within conference. But the perception for the Big 12 is that it is the number one basketball conference. And I do believe it is the number one basketball conference. And because of that, we get more teams ranked than others because of it. Which, by the way, number 13, Texas A&M, an SEC school, went down to the lowly UCF to open the season. Just saying. So even UCF, which is not perceived as a top tier basketball brand, still took down the number 13 team in the country with the SEC's. And the only reason I'm bringing that up is that's why the perception is where it is, because of the out of conference schedule and how well the Big 12 performs outside of it. The Big 12 will have to do better as far as national championships are concerned to
Yeah,
maintain that.
they definitely could, but I mean, having Arizona now added and always having KU always helps, and Tech being perennially just in the mix here now as a team that was not until
Houston.
not until a couple years ago. Houston always being in the mix. Texas is no longer in the conference, but we replace them with Arizona. I mean, it's not like it's a complete subtraction there by losing Texas, just because we are able to add in a couple other schools that help out. There's
My
not
point. My
Colorado
point
and
is.
Utah are not necessarily bringing it in here either, but
But
it
my
helps.
point. My point, saying all of that is right. We've earned that badge of honor as far as basketball is concerned. We've got to do the same thing with football, and we've got a chance to win it. We got to have some teams that win the championship. The perennial Alabama is gone. Nick Saban is gone. Alabama is not Nick Saban's Alabama. I don't think they will be for a long time until they find the next Nick Saban, right? So that leaves Georgia, etc. You've got to beat those teams to change that perception and to change it to more than one team going into the end of the season for that to happen. Like it or not, the Big 12 is not perceived, ratings aside, is not perceived as a stronger football conference than the SEC. Now, the Big 10, is it a stronger football conference? Probably not. Well, I'll take that back. You've got some pretty consistent winning brands there as well, and have been in championship games and been more successful in the playoff than what the Big 12 teams have. So until that performance meets that standard, I don't think that that's going to change. Whether you're talking
Wait,
about Washington.
say that again though. You're saying that the Big Ten has had more playoff and more teams in the playoff and had more success in the playoffs than the Big 12.
Correct.
Right? Yeah. I mean, that's yeah. Yeah. I'm right there with you on all
So
this.
until that perception changes, you're not going to get more than one. It's
I
going to
know.
be
I know. It just sucks that before the season started, it was like, man, I bet this will be the case. I bet the Big Ten and the SEC just have more name brands and they'll get more teams in because of the bigger name brands. And now that it's happened, it's like, dang it. It's not a huge surprise at all. It's not something new, or new information to me. It's just, all right, well, moving on. Thought it would be this way.
And that's how
And
it's
you're
got to
right. That's the
be.
only way we change it. Well, yeah. And the only way we change it, you're right, is by winning. Is by going in there and just saying, hey, you know what? We got BYU in this year. They're 5-7 last year. Their program on the rise. This quarterback for BYU, I know I said some extra in him last week, but basically he didn't play high school, football during his COVID year of his final season, so he didn't get scouted correctly. And all of a sudden he's on the up and up, and he's getting a bunch more playing time and is learning while playing. So last year might have been bad. This year's pretty good. They're unbeaten. But now he gets to, man, you got to have that full leap here pretty quickly. You got to have that where, hey, I'm not saying you have to win it all every year, Big 12, to really change perception, but just getting past the first round a couple of years. Hey, 2022, like I said, TCU, Big 12 team, plays in the championship game. If BYU can get to the championship game or at least win the first round, hey, Big 12's always got a team in the second round. They're the one team. It just is a little annoying as well, too, that because of all of this, it's not like I see, Iowa State will be the other team where if BYU doesn't win the first one, and maybe Iowa State will win the second, maybe Iowa State will win the first one. And just like, we got all our eggs in the basket of representing the brand as one team every year. But it's not anything new. It's not any new info. It's just annoying
Well,
because you look at Indiana and
it's them and the out of conference for the rest of us. So, for example, UCF, and I'll throw ourselves under the bus here. When we played Florida, had we had a quarterback that could hit the broadside of a barn, now we're on our 4-string one, and it looks like we've got a guy who can throw. That game should have been a win, but UCF let the conference down. UCF not only let itself down, and then the in-state as talking portion of it, right? Because we're not going to play Florida for a long while. But on top of that, we let the conference down. So we have to consistently beat those other teams in those other conferences in the out of conference and make it deep. Whoever the representative is needs to be one of the teams that's hopefully playing for the championship most years, but at least, as you said, make it out of the first round consistently.
yeah, and to that point, I can talk down Oklahoma State all I want to, but I'm going to try to talk up here in a second because we scheduled Arkansas this year. Next year it's at Oregon, then Oregon was in Stillwater, Arkansas, then 2028. I mean, it's Alabama that we're hosting. 2029 at Alabama, and then after that it's Tulsa and Arkansas and Nebraska scheduled. So hopefully Nebraska's good in 2034 and 2035. So we get a chance to play them in those years, a decade plus from now. We'll go, all right, hey, we got a good non-conference schedule, and hopefully we're also kind of peaking at the same time because this year I thought we were kind of peaking and headed that way. Then the way we played Arkansas, I'm like, well, maybe Arkansas is good. And then of course, once Big 12 conference play started, I believe that we're good less and less every single week. So it has to match up with that timeline too, right? We have to go, hey, we just gotta keep getting better as a program, keep ascending so that when we do play at Alabama in 2029, Alabama's one, hopefully still pretty good as they are, and their name brand, I wouldn't think would go that far down in 5 years, honestly. But who knows? And when we play them, hopefully they're good. We're also good enough to play them well, where we can beat them at their place. Otherwise, I'm not saying it's all for naught, but otherwise it's like, ah, man, all right, your non-conference schedule this year is tough because you don't think you're gonna be that good. And that
Well, I
speaks more
mean,
to the Big
look at
12
it this
teams
way.
just not
Every year's
being that
every
great.
year's an opportunity. There's a requirement in the conference to schedule one P4 out of conference team. For us next year, it's going to be North Carolina. We've Who knows how good North Carolina is going to be next year, right? And we've got to beat them. The more teams that we schedule out of conference from the quote unquote perceived power two teams or power two conferences, right? That we win those out of conference games and we do well in the postseason, that's where that legitimacy, there's an opportunity for that to change, but we've got to make that happen. That's on the teams in the Big 12. If the Big 12 teams want to be perceived differently, right? We have to do those two things. That's the path. Otherwise, we're gonna have one in the playoff every year. So whoever that representative is, which in the Big 12, we've said this repeatedly, what makes this conference fun is it's competitive and you never know what you're going to get. That means that team, whoever it is in that particular year, will have to consistently win those games against those other teams. That's how it changes. Otherwise, just get used to it. It's going to be 112, one Big 12 team. If it goes to 16, the reason it goes to 16 is because the SEC and the Big 10 thinks that it can get 3 or 4 teams into the playoff.
And it's because like Indiana wins it for them one year and they go, crap. Indiana's not the biggest name brand, doesn't draw as many TV eyes, and all of a sudden we're kind of going, well, maybe 16. We could always get Ohio State in even with 2 or 3 losses. For example, I'm just throwing out there, not that I think that's going to happen.
Yeah, so at this point, that's kind of what you're looking at. So to me, the more immediate question is, do we think that Iowa State could position itself, if the dominoes were to fall the right way, to get itself into the playoff or move up 3 to 4 spots within 3 weeks? That's the question.
Yeah. And I just got to wait and see. Wait and see to find out. Because that's the name of the game here. Can we get a couple of massive donors to really help involve NIL funds so we get better recruits in the Big 12 than the other teams? That seems like more of an uphill possibility, but you've got to have a guy like KJ Jefferson transfer from a situation where he was really good at Arkansas into a situation where he can get a little bit more money and transfer to UCF than Arkansas was offering. But he just wasn't that good at Arkansas. I mean, just kind of was how you guys have seen he is. Same thing with like Alan Bowman. Alan Bowman would have to be a guy who never had his full chance at other universities, but comes to Oklahoma State and Stillwater, and all of a sudden he just blossoms like no other. And that might have happened a little bit last year, but definitely it's not happened this year. So you just have to have
Well,
those
and
right scenarios where it all lines up.
it's got to be multiple team or multiple years though. Here's the thing
Right.
I think
Yeah.
that people are
It's
starting to realize, right, is and UCF's a perfect example. You rotate QBs. Was John Rice Plumlee better his second year versus his first year? Absolutely. Right. KJ Jefferson here 1 year. Ja'Cory Brown here 1 year. What did you see Dylan Risk do? He was, believe it or not, as a redshirt sophomore, the one that was the longest in the playbook. So he understood it. He made the reads. He went to the right place with the ball, etc. Right? That is a component of this too, especially when it comes to quarterback. Quarterback needs, in my opinion, just like a basketball team, typically doesn't, you don't throw away, you can't, most people can't do the John Calipari method, get all 5 stars onto a Kentucky basketball team, and then, just out athlete everyone or out talent everyone. Most people are not going to be able to do that, especially not in football, right? So then the question is going to be, can we entice said quarterback? The NIL is going to be more expensive in some ways for us because you have to pay for more than one quarterback because you don't know if that one's going to work out. So you've got to be able to have at least 2 high caliber quarterbacks, and you've got to be able to carry that quarterback for multiple seasons for it to really translate to success. Dylan Gabriel's another example. He goes from UCF, he goes to UCLA, but transfers 2 weeks later, goes to Oklahoma. He plays well at Oklahoma, but he's not playing Oregon level Oklahoma. He goes to Oregon, and whereas he couldn't run, or he was being taught how to run at UCF, at Oklahoma, he got better at being able to pull the ball and run. And then when he got to Oregon, now he's really good at running and being able to pull the ball and run, and he's dominating as a quarterback, right? So again, that idea of being able to develop guys, finding the right guy, it's going to take multiple years to do that. Just like for a basketball team, normally the first year, if you throw a basketball team together, they're not going to gel until 3/4 of the way through the season.
Yeah, it's the way the Celtics won last year. They added maybe a 1 piece or 2 piece, but so many guys have been playing together for so long. Al Horford, Jalen Brown, Jason Tatum. This is not an NBA podcast at all. So I'm instead going to pivot here a little bit and talk about the games this weekend and maybe use some more basketball terms later on. But for us, this podcast here, we're just going to basically give our predictions here for this Saturday, November 9th games. Start off with 11 a.m. kickoff in Cincinnati, Ohio. So 11 a.m. Central Time. West Virginia at Cincinnati. Who you got and why?
Cincinnati. West Virginia's sputtering. They're struggling. Cincinnati has a pretty good offense. So I'm going. West Virginia's got some folks in their secondary that are hurt. So I'm going to go with Cincinnati in this game.
Yeah, I am too. Honestly, we haven't faced Cincinnati. I don't know too much about them overall, more than what I've watched here and there and then kind of read up on. But I mean, the main thing I take away is Cincinnati's record is they're 5-3. They're 3-2 in the Big 12. It's the same record as West Virginia has in the Big 12, but I just like Cincinnati better overall, and they're favored at home here by 4, so that makes me feel better picking them. The next game here on the docket, Central Time Zone again here, is 2:30 p.m. Iowa State at KU. And Iowa State is favored by 3 on the road, with over under a 50.5. It's all from ESPN Bet, by the way.
Yeah, for me, I'm definitely taking Iowa State over KU.
Same here. I think Iowa State bounces back. It is interesting to me that on the season, Kansas has a better as a running back with more rushing yards than Iowa State does. But of course, that just is how this is because Rocco Becht is their offense there for the Iowa State Cyclones. So doesn't mean I'm not begging them. And also, it's a fun game. It's in Kansas City again. It's, of course, still the Chiefs Stadium while they are under construction there at KU. Then Colorado at Texas Tech. I mean, this one, 62.5 over under. This is a high scoring affair here, I think, in the Big 12. Not extremely high scoring because it's not the highest scoring over under on the docket here this weekend. But yeah, I'm picking Colorado, but barely. I mean, I don't feel great about it, I'd say. On the road, favored by 4, but still, I don't feel great about picking them.
What was interesting for me last week, and this was the most interesting game. Last week, I'd picked Iowa State versus Texas Tech, right? Both teams did fairly well holding the other team's offenses in check. Texas Tech is a high-scoring offense. They didn't score a whole lot of points last week, right? But what surprised me is that they were able to hold Iowa State to so few points last week too. So I don't know about this one, but I think I don't think Texas Tech's defense all of a sudden got that much better. So until Colorado proves me otherwise, I'm going to go with Colorado in this one.
Shedeur Sanders though and Travis Hunter they are bringing the party to town because tickets are $189. It's the lowest ticket price, and for a lot of the other games I'm seeing there, I mean the Holy War BYU Utah is also over $100, but it's definitely not 189. So
Well, I mean
Sanders
they're
brothers and family,
rejoining that
yeah.
rivalry together. I mean, that's going to be much anticipated.
But what I'm getting at is that's not even as expensive for the cheapest ticket as Colorado Tech. So one heck of a good matchup here this week in Lubbock. But then I'm just going to say we could talk about my team or your team next here, but I'm just going to say UCF is listed here for whatever reason, and maybe it's in alphabetical order of some type. I'm not really sure, but alphabetical by the home team. But UCF at Arizona State, I will say since Arizona State's favored by 2.5, I'm picking Arizona State just because I saw Arizona State just beat the crap out of us for homecoming at our place, and I did not like what I saw one bit. And it made me very nervous picking Oklahoma State in any game this season going forward, just because Arizona State looked so good.
Yeah, so for me, I'm gonna not pick against UCF, right? But I do have some reasons behind that. This team, both these teams on paper have very, very similar um, builds, right? Arizona State opened at -3.5, which is basically a toss up. It's a half a point to Arizona State. Cam Scadaboo may be out or limited for this game, and he's their offense. Levitt is a very good and serviceable quarterback. He came back off of injury last week, played really, really well, or last game. But Scadaboo, I still think that Dillingham's playing some games with that and listing him as questionable. But I do know that Arizona State has some guys out in the secondary. Had this been any other quarterback than Dylan Risk, I probably would have went with Arizona State if I'm answering honestly. But I do have, that hopium versus copium thing. What I saw out of Dylan Risk, even if he plays 60% of how he played last week against Arizona State's a much better opponent, and they play the same style of offense that we do. The difference is you saw how much the offense opened up when you had a passing quarterback, and Dylan Risk was able to hit open receivers in short yardage situations. He was able to hit the mid range, and he was able to hit the long bomb. And he didn't play when you watched him. He didn't play like a guy who was playing his first game. He was cool, calm, collected, didn't get rattled. So I think that the other advantage that UCF has is on tape, all you have seen all season long was a run first quarterback. And now we've got a passing quarterback. And now you've got to account for way more people, and you can't just stack the box against UCF, which opens up RJ Harvey. Last week, RJ Harvey was 5 yards down the field before someone was able to try to tackle him. All the games before that, they were crowding the tackle box, and he was still the leading running back in the Big 12 this year. So I'm going to pick UCF. They seem to have new blood. There's an air of excitement around Dylan Risk, but a lot of it, we'll live or die by the mistakes of Dylan Risk, because he did make a couple of throws last week that could have gone the other way. But by and large, these two teams are so similar. I think RJ Harvey is better than Scadaboo. I think that'll be the difference in this game. Even
All right.
defensively, they face similar schemes.
Yeah, this is the matchup that I'm really looking forward to just because I think it'll just be super close. It is the tightest spread of any game this week into the Big 12. And like you said, it's two very similar teams here from stylistically standpoint for their offense, and excited to see it. And also see a little more Dylan Risk. I got to admit, I've not been watching too much of Dylan Risk in UCF football, not as much as I should have been. And definitely excited to see this one here because I do not think I'll be tuning in for this next game, at least that much. It's Oklahoma State at TCU. And listen, I do not want to sound just all doom and gloom here. So I'm going to say I think the Cowboys have a
Don't
fighting
lie. You're
chance.
going to have OSU on. Come
I'm
on.
gonna have them on, but it will not be on. They may not be main TV worthy anymore. They may not. They may be delegated to the iPad, not no longer on the TV, right? So we'll see here. They may have the second screen priority because I do
Has
not think
OSU
this
given up? Has OSU given up on the season?
maybe it's a topic going around. I mean the latest video I did was talking about if Nardo and Casey Dunn here behind me are gonna be back next year, and I think it's a possibility. Gundy's pretty stubborn. So he's had some pretty bad comments here this week as well too. Apparently, you can be too poor to criticize him. So uh, Oklahoma State fans are having fun with that one and poking fun at him / lashing out, depending on how you take it. I will say I'm picking TCU. If Oklahoma State beats TCU, awesome. But this is a 10.5 point uh, favorite for
Spread.
TCU. Yeah, and it's a 67.5 point over under. So I'm thinking this leans TCU and by a lot, and that to me would also seem Oklahoma State as just opted out. They're gonna transfer out at the end of the season or do whatever because they're losing recruits too. It's not good, but it's worth the of an off-season topic to dive more into this. I would much rather talk basketball and wrestling before then, but
Wrestling.
yeah, wrestling. We're the best wrestling program in the Big 12, bar none. So
How many
even though
how
we didn't win
many
the Big 12
how
last
many
year.
wrestling programs are there in the Big 12 right now?
There are I do not know the number off the top of my head, but there are a lot of affiliated Big 12 wrestling schools. So if you look it up, I'm not trying to say that there are 16 teams that have a wrestling program, but there are definitely a lot of teams that have wrestling programs. But there's a lot of teams that are affiliated. So like you wouldn't think of it, but South Dakota State is a Big 12 affiliate wrestling
Mhm.
school. And then there are plenty others too. But just to say, yeah, I'm picking TCU. Unfortunately, I do think they'll win. Hopefully, it's only by a little bit, and we see a little bit more Malachi Smith, backup quarterback, instead of Alan Bowman, just because why not play the backup? I mean, he still has the red shirt. You've got two other guys who are going to be fresh for next season. So unless you're worried about Malachi Smith getting injured, and I mean, held out for multiple seasons, just go and play the rookie. We're not allowing that many sacks, so let him pass it. We just can't run block.
By the
Yeah, I'm
way,
still picking
the
TCU.
answer to your question, 3 current Big 12 football playing teams have wrestling teams.
Oh well, that's what I mean. There's a lot
Yeah,
of affiliate.
the rest of them that are affiliates are Air Force, California Baptist,
CBU. Oh,
uh,
yeah. Yeah, no, they're a
Missouri.
household name.
Oh yeah.
Missouri.
Missouri, North Dakota State, Northern Colorado, Northern Iowa. A lot of Northern going on here. Oklahoma, South Dakota State, Utah Valley, and Wyoming.
Yeah,
I'm
a lot
not
of
familiar.
programs.
I'm not familiar with the wrestling world, but those are not great Division One schools in other sports.
Correct. Correct. I'm not saying anything different. We got a lot of Big 12 wrestling schools exist, but there are 4 Big 12 equestrian teams. Ask me how I know why. Anyways, I'm still picking TCU. I assume you're picking TCU as well.
Correct.
All right. Well, let's then talk about the Holy War here because I went on and long enough about Oklahoma State. Got BYU at Utah, of course. The undefeated Brigham Young University.
BYU wipes the
Um,
floor with Utah.
BYU, BYU's favored by 3. The over under is 40 and a
It's
half.
because it's at Utah, but I mean, it's not like they have to travel far. I think BYU. I mean, granted, it's a rivalry game. You never know what you're going to get in rivalry games. It's the rejoinment of the Holy War, which has a lot of bad blood over the years for a variety of reasons, right? I think it's kind of lost its luster because they haven't played in a really long time, but there's still plenty of people that um, that think about this game, but I think BYU is just the better team this year, bar none, and I'm going to pick BYU in this game. I think you're muted, Cal.
I'm picking BYU, but
And you're muted.
not muted anymore, hopefully. Picking BYU, but I don't feel as good about it as I thought I would before I dove in here. Of the leaders on all the offensive categories here, rushing, it's Bernard, Utah, and receiving is also Singer, Utah as well too. So, Retzlaff is the leader in passing yards, of course, here, but that's a given in my mind. So I just gotta say there's a little apprehension here and going, BYU can't stop the run real well, right? Just because there's some teams sticking around on BYU, but I don't predict an upset here. I'm still picking BYU, just maybe not a blowout, maybe a little bit closer. 7 points. It's a rivalry game. Anything can happen. Some weird things can happen, like Oklahoma State can win Bedlam for the last Bedlam of the ever, and have a Dylan Gabriel as the quarterback when they win Bedlam, and then the next year not win a Big 12 game. So it's just bizarre. Anything can happen in rivalry games. That's all I'm getting at. Now, we've got some Big 12 basketball, not necessarily conference play, but still going on here. We'll be back next week with more information, do a little more of a basketball preview of sorts, and to get on hopefully another one or two other Big 12 College Huddle members. And yeah, Roger, anything else you want to add here for the rest of this episode here and wrap this one up a little bit?
I guess I'll say good week of sports for UCF. Obviously, big win in basketball, big win in football. Let's hope we keep that going. From a basketball perspective, the big question for UCF's basketball team was going to be, if you put together a collection of talent, can they gel fast enough? And it looks like at least early returns are that this team has the talent because of the defensive prowess that we have to be able to compete. So I'm excited about that. Outside of that, the big game for me this week, I think one of the most competitive games in the Big 12, and I think the one to watch is Colorado Texas Tech. I think UCF Arizona State's going to be a good game, but I think that's the one to watch. So if I were to pick in the time slots, I'd pick West Virginia, Cincinnati, Colorado, Texas Tech, UCF, Arizona State, and then round out your day with BYU, Utah.
All right. Well, that sounds like one heck of a game plan here. I'll say Oklahoma State plays St. Thomas, Minnesota at home here this Sunday in Gallagher Arena in basketball because we've moved on. I'm already off the football season at this point. We're 0-6 conference play. Big 12 had a real nice graphic they put out about teams still in the hunt to win the Big 12 championship, and there were 14 teams listed. Notice we left off as the 0-6 in conference play Oklahoma State Cowboys. So thanks, Big 12, for that. But yeah, basketball season has crept up upon us and is fully launching here. So conference play doesn't open up here for a little bit. Oklahoma State's first conference game is at least a home matchup, but it's against Houston December 30th. So we'll be back with some more basketball talk here over the next couple of weeks here on the Big 12 Huddle. Thanks so much for everyone for tuning in. Please like, share, subscribe, send to a friend, and rebrand us. We cannot be the Temu of podcasting. We have 1,500 plays on an episode. The Temu of podcasting would be like somebody who doesn't know how to do what they're doing, doesn't have a thumbnail out there, doesn't put the tags in appropriately, doesn't put the links in the description, doesn't have time codes in their podcast. Calling out you, somebody. So I don't want to mention anyone specifically, even though I've got several names coming to
How
my
you
head.
gonna call them out and not mention who they are? I mean, and they're obviously
Okay, the Ryan Russillo podcast, you can put time codes. You guys are big enough. You can do it. You can figure it out. If I can figure out time codes, you guys can figure it out. Frequently, the Bill Simmons podcast just put that out. But any ESPN podcast that's like online on YouTube, time codes like that. Those would be just great to have. And also Harris highlights with their just absolutely huge clickbait deal going on with the conference. The college football rankings are trash, and then discussing how that Really, they're not trash. They're just exactly the people. Great clickbait. So, anyways, I have way more shade to throw at somebody that can be left for another episode and just kind of keep you on your toes. But please do follow all of us here. Oh, it's done over this way here. On the overlay that's created, not the Team Mode podcasting again, because we have overlays here at the Big 12 Huddle. And so at College Huddle, at the CJ Tour, at the Knighted Ones, and at Night Bengal to stay up to date. And actually at Big 12 Huddle, because we have a Twitter now too. So how cool is that? As well as the podcast is available wherever you listen to podcasts. So please like, share, subscribe, send to a friend. And Roger, with that being said,
go Knights
and go Pokes.